The poker game of fate. The desert night carried a silence so deep that even the coyotes kept their distance. The lone rider moved slow, his horse's hooves sinking into the dry earth with tired rhythm. Dust clung to his boots, his duster, his hat brim. He looked like he had been carved out of the very land he roamed. Sunburnt skin, hollow cheeks, eyes shaded with years of things he no longer talked about. Folks called him the Lonesome Cowboy because he never lingered, never belonged, never stayed long enough for anyone to remember his name. He rode into Copper Bend, a small town clinging to life along the edge of the frontier. The saloon lamps spilled yellow light across the dirt street, painting shadows that swayed with the wind. Music hummed faintly from inside, mingling with drunken laughter and the shuffle of boots. To him, it was all background noise. He needed whiskey, maybe a bed if his coins stretched far enough. He tied up his horse, pushed through the swinging doors, and walked into the smoke-filled air of the Silver Star Saloon. Inside, the usual chaos reigned. Miners with dirt still caked on their faces shouted over cheap liquor. Two cowhands argued about cattle prices. A barmaid with tired eyes carried mugs, dodging a drunk who tried to grab her wrist. In the far corner, men hunched over a poker table, their faces lit by lamplight and greed. The cowboy didn't plan to join them. Cards were a dangerous road. He'd lost too much in his younger days. But tonight, something pulled him closer. Maybe it was fate, maybe just the loneliness whispering again. He ordered whiskey, took a slow drink, then drifted toward the game. The dealer was a slick man with a curled mustache and eyes like a snake. The players were a mix, one rancher, two drifters, and a rail foreman who wore gold on his watch chain. The stakes were high, coins and bills stacked in messy towers. But as the cowboy watched, he realized money wasn't the only thing on the line. In the corner, three young Chinese girls stood silently, their heads bowed, hands folded neatly in front of them. Their silk dresses were faded, travel-worn, but still spoke of a homeland far across the sea. At first, the cowboy thought they were serving girls, maybe brought in for entertainment. But when one of the players casually said, "I'll raise, throw in one of the girls," the truth hit him hard. The cowboy froze, the whiskey burning in his throat. The girls weren't free. They were wagers, flesh and blood stakes on a pile of cards. He almost turned away. He didn't want trouble. The frontier had taught him that a man survived by keeping his head down and his gun holstered unless there was no other choice. But something in the way the girls stood, silent, resigned, like they had already been passed from hand to hand too many times, stirred something in him. He had been alone too long not to recognize that same hollow look. The dealer spotted him. "You playin', stranger? Always room for another hand." The cowboy hesitated. He should have walked out. Instead, he heard himself say, "Deal me in." The cards slid across the table, smooth and sharp. The cowboy's hands moved slow, steady. He didn't gamble for thrills anymore. Every bet was calculated, measured against instinct. The other men laughed, cursed, slammed their fists when luck betrayed them. But he stayed quiet, eyes narrowing at the corners of his cards, his mind working like a clock. The game stretched late into the night. One by one, the drifters folded out. The rancher cursed his losses and stormed away. That left the rail foreman, red-faced and stubborn, and the slick dealer, whose grin never wavered. The pot grew, coins clinking as they pushed the stakes higher. Then came the moment that set the cowboy's fate. The foreman, drunk and desperate, sneered. "I'll raise, double my coins, and throw in the last of my winnings." He gestured with a sloppy hand toward the three Chinese girls, who flinched almost imperceptibly. The cowboy's stomach turned. People ain't winnings. But no one else at the table batted an eye. In this corner of the frontier, everything had a price. The dealer grinned, licking his lips. "High stakes, gentlemen. Who's calling?" The cowboy stared at his cards. He held a full house, 3 kings and 2 tens. Strong enough to win. Strong enough to change something he hadn't planned on. Slowly, he pushed his stack of coins into the center. I'm in. The last hand played out tense as gunpowder. The dealer's grin faltered when the cowboy laid his cards down, kings and tens fanning across the table. The foreman swore violently, knocking his chair over. You cheating son of... The cowboy's hand rested on the butt of his revolver. His voice was low, steady. Game's fair. Don't make it something else. Silence spread. The dealer cleared his throat. Fair hand. Pot's yours, stranger. Money, and the girls. The cowboy looked at the 3 of them. They avoided his gaze, as if they already knew they would simply be moved to another man's shadow. He pushed back his chair slowly, gathering the coins into his satchel. Then he said something that silenced the room. They don't belong to nobody. Not anymore. The saloon went still. A few men muttered. The foreman spat. You think you're some kinda hero? Those girls'll just run off or get taken again. They're property, and property don't walk free. The cowboy stood tall, his voice calm but edged with steel. Not mine. Not yours. They walk where they choose. He didn't wait for an answer. He motioned for the girls to follow, and to his quiet surprise, they did. Out into the night, past the horses, past the stairs of the whole saloon. The desert wind met them, cool and empty. For the first time in years, the cowboy didn't feel quite so alone. He hadn't planned this, hadn't wanted this. But fate had dealt him a hand, and he'd played it. Now, 3 pairs of uncertain eyes followed him into the night, and he wondered what in God's name he was supposed to do next. A stranger's kindness. The trail back to the cowboy's ranch was long and quiet. The desert wind cut sharp across the mesas, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Behind him rode the 3 girls, perched on his horse while he walked beside it, reins in hand. None of them spoke. Their silence was heavy, layered with fear and disbelief. They had been traded like coins too many times to expect anything different now. The cowboy kept his hat low, saying nothing. He wasn't good with words anyhow. He figured actions would speak clearer. Still, he wondered what they thought of him, this rough stranger who had pulled them out of one cage but hadn't explained where he was leading them. By dawn, they reached the ranch. It wasn't much to look at, a worn clapboard house, a small barn leaning on one side, fences in need of mending. The land stretched wide but hungry, the soil cracked from too many summers without rain. To him, though, it was home, the only place he had ever come back to after drifting too far. He helped the girls down gently, motioning them inside. The house smelled of dust and old wood. "Ain't fancy," he muttered, scratching at the back of his neck, "but it'll do." The girls looked around warily. The eldest, she couldn't have been more than 20, guided the younger 2 closer together, protective like a mother hen. Their dark eyes flicked from the furniture to the cowboy's hands, as if waiting for the demand that usually came. But it never did. He set a kettle on the stove, filled it with water from the pump, and lit the fire. The crackle of wood filled the silence. He laid bread, dried meat, and beans on the table, then stepped back. "Eat. You're safe here." They didn't move at first. Only when the youngest, maybe 15, reached timidly for the bread did the others follow. They ate slow, careful, as though the food might vanish if they took too much. The cowboy leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching. For the first time in a long while, he felt the quiet of the house was less empty. The days that followed were awkward at best. The girls spoke little English, their words clipped and soft. The cowboy knew no Chinese, so they worked mostly in gestures and silence. He showed them how to fetch water, where to find the garden tools, how to mend simple things. But unlike every man before, he never barked orders, never raised a hand. When they faltered, he simply repeated the task, patient as stone. At night, they took the spare bedroom, all three curled on the same bed like sparrows in a nest. The cowboy stayed in the barn some nights, giving them space. He didn't know how to be what they needed, protector, maybe, or simply not another threat. But he knew enough to give them respect, and respect was something they'd had precious little of. Little by little, the walls cracked. The eldest girl, who carried herself with quiet dignity, began cooking meals without being asked. The middle one, about 17, tended to the garden, humming strange songs under her breath. The youngest laughed once, shy and startled, when the cowboy tripped over his own boots. That laugh stuck with him for days, like sunlight breaking through a storm. But Copper Bend was a small town, and small towns talked. Word spread fast that the Lonesome Cowboy had won 3 Chinese girls in a card game and taken them home. Some folks snickered behind their whiskey glasses. Others spat in the dirt, muttering about foreigners and bad blood. The railroad men especially didn't take kindly to it. They had brought over hundreds of laborers from China to lay tracks, treating them like beasts of burden, and to them, the girls were just another piece of property gone astray. One man in particular took offense, Clayton Briggs, owner of a sprawling cattle ranch that swallowed half the valley. He was broad, mean-eyed, and used to getting what he wanted. When he heard about the cowboy and the girls, his lips curled into a sneer. 3 of 'em, he said to his men around the poker table at the saloon. Ain't right, one man keepin' all that to himself. Should have been put up for sale proper. I reckon he don't know what to do with 'em anyhow. Maybe I'll teach him. The warning came one afternoon when the cowboy rode into town for supplies. He tied his horse outside the general store, only to find the sheriff waiting with arms crossed. Sheriff McGraw was an old man, worn thin by too many years of law that barely stuck. "Folks are talkin'," McGraw said, lowering his voice. "Clayton Briggs is stirrin' trouble. Says those girls ain't rightly yours to keep." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "They ain't mine to keep. They're free." The sheriff sighed. "That may be true, but out here, freedom don't hold up well when men like Briggs get it in their heads otherwise. You best watch your back." The cowboy tipped his hat, bought his supplies, and rode out without another word. Inside, though, a storm brewed. He had taken a gamble that night at the saloon, and it had paid out more than he expected. But now he had something to lose, and men like Briggs weren't the kind to let go of a grudge. That evening, back at the ranch, the girls waited on the porch when he returned. The eldest stepped forward, her eyes sharp with unspoken questions. He set down the supplies and nodded. "Trouble's comin'," he said simply. They didn't understand all the words, but they understood the tone. Fear flickered across their faces. He hated that. Hated that after everything, fear was still the shadow they lived under. "I'll keep you safe," he promised. The words felt clumsy on his tongue, but they were true. For the first time in years, he had something worth standing his ground for. Not land, not cattle, not gold, but 3 souls who deserved better than the hand life had dealt them. That night, he cleaned his revolver slow and steady, the lamplight catching the steel. Outside, the wind stirred the desert grass. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote cried. The cowboy knew Briggs would come. The only question was love, when, loyalty, and legacy. The morning came heavy with stillness. The cowboy felt it in his bones before he even stepped outside. Trouble had a way of carrying its own kind of silence, the kind that pressed against your skin like heat before a storm. He saddled his horse, scanned the horizon, and saw dust rising where the trail cut into the valley. Riders. More than a few. He squinted under the brim of his hat and knew without needing to count. Clayton Briggs was coming, and he wasn't coming alone. Inside the house, the 3 girls stood near the window, their faces pale in the early light. The eldest clutched the youngest's hand, while the middle one hovered uncertainly, torn between hiding and stepping forward. The cowboy met their eyes, steady and calm. "It's Briggs," he said. "He means to take you." The youngest's lips trembled. "You stop him?" she asked in broken English. He nodded once. "I'll stop him." It was a simple promise, but it carried all the weight of his heart. By midday, Briggs and 6 of his men thundered into the yard, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. Briggs himself rode at the front, a thick man with a scar down his jaw and cruelty carved into every line of his face. He swung down from his saddle, boots striking the earth with a thud. "Well now," he drawled, spitting into the dirt. "Look at this little homestead. Heard you been keepin' some prizes all to yourself, cowboy. Don't sit right with me." The cowboy stood on the porch, revolver holstered at his hip, shoulders square. "They ain't prizes. They're free." Briggs barked a laugh, mean and sharp. "Free? Out here, nothing's free. Those girls were bought and sold fair before you ever laid a hand on 'em. I'm talking what should have been mine." He motioned, and 2 of his men started forward. The cowboy's hand hovered over his gun. His voice dropped, low and iron. "Take one more step, and you'll find yourself bleedin' in the dust." The men froze. Briggs sneered, but the way the cowboy stood, calm, ready, unshaken, made even his hired guns think twice. "You really gonna risk your life for them?" Briggs asked. "Foreigners ain't worth it." The cowboy's eyes hardened. "Ain't about where they're from. It's about bein' human." For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Briggs snarled, drawing his pistol. "Then die for 'em." The first shot cracked like thunder. The cowboy's revolver was already in his hand, faster than most men could blink. Briggs staggered back, his shoulder torn red. His men scrambled, shouting, pulling their guns. The yard exploded with gunfire. Bullets tore into the fence, the barn wall, the dry earth at the cowboy's boots. He moved with grim precision, every shot measured, every pull of the trigger a piece of survival carved into him from years on the frontier. 2 of Briggs' men dropped in the dirt. Another howled, clutching his leg. The girls huddled inside the house, but the eldest pulled the middle one down low, shielding the youngest with her own body. The cowboy ducked behind the porch post, reloaded quick, and fired again. Smoke filled the yard, mixing with the smell of blood and sweat. Briggs cursed, dragging himself behind a trough, firing wild. When the dust cleared, only Briggs remained, bleeding and furious, his gun trembling in his hand. He tried to lift it for one last shot, but the cowboy's revolver was already leveled at his chest. "Drop it," the cowboy said. Briggs' eyes darted to the house, to the shadows of the girls watching through the window. His sneer twisted. "This ain't over. Men like me, we don't stop." The cowboy's voice was cold as steel. "Then men like me keep standin' in your way." Briggs' gun slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground. He staggered back toward his horse, clutching his wound, and hauled himself into the saddle. Without another word, he rode off, leaving his fallen men in the dust. Silence settled again, broken only by the wind. The cowboy lowered his gun, chest heaving. He turned toward the house. The girls stepped out slowly, their eyes wide with fear and awe. The youngest ran to him first, clutching his arm. "Safe," she whispered. He looked down at her, at the tears streaking her dirt-stained face, and nodded. "Safe." The eldest approached next, her gaze steady. For the first time since he'd met her, her eyes softened. She spoke in halting English, but her meaning was clear. "You, different man. Not take. Not hurt. You give. The cowboy swallowed hard. Words never came easy to him, but he managed. Don't know if I'm much of a man worth praisin', but I'll never let you be taken again. The days that followed were not easy. Briggs nursed his wound, and though he spat promises of vengeance, the sheriff warned him to stay away. The town still whispered, some with scorn, others with grudging respect. But on the ranch, a quiet transformation bloomed. The girls began to smile more, laugh more. The youngest chased chickens across the yard, squealing with joy. The middle one sang louder when she worked in the garden, her voice carrying like birdsong. The eldest found moments of peace, standing on the porch in the evenings, watching the cowboy mend fences with a look that spoke of trust slowly won. The cowboy felt the change in himself, too. Where once his days stretched empty, now each sunrise brought purpose. He found himself listening for their laughter, their voices, the simple rhythm of a home no longer hollow. He was still lonesome by nature, still carved by years of wandering, but now he wasn't alone. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fire, the cowboy sat with the girls on the porch. The youngest leaned against his arm, the middle hummed softly, and the eldest turned to him with quiet words. "We choose stay," she said, "with you. Not because win card game. Because we want." The cowboy's throat tightened. He tipped his hat low to hide his eyes. "Then you ain't mine," he said softly. "But this place is yours as much as it is mine." The eldest nodded. The three of them leaned into the stillness, watching the desert stars flicker to life. For the first time in years, the cowboy felt the ache of loneliness fade. He had gambled on fate in a smoky saloon and won something no man had the right to wager, not possession, but family. And that, he knew, was worth more than any gold, any land, any game of cards.